another story of the same. All right, good morning and welcome to another episode of the Baltimore Bureau podcast. I'm Easy Jackson here with Darna Nora.
Hello.
Dr. Khalil M. Harris, Esquire. And our guest host this week is my good friend DDM.
Hi.
AKA the Secretary of Shade.
Come on,
welcome,
Secretary.
Welcome to the show.
The Minister of Overshadowing.
A human parasol. Oh, I'm sorry. Would you like some shade?
DDM just recently has been getting a lot of attention for his reading of Unhinged, the Omarosa story.
Yes.
And his AKA is the Secretary of Shade.
Yes.
I'm loving it, man. The very first episode went up, I was home frying chicken, and I just had you playing, like, and people was coming in the kitchen like, who is that? Like, people was catching a little glimpse and busting out laughing. I'm like, yo, this I was like, yo, he's on to something with this. And sure enough, the next morning, it was just like, woof. It was like a wildfire. I was like, wow. It's good to have you on, man.
Thank you.
Are there, by the way, carbon copies of the receipts? Because there's so many receipts. It's like
So many
that
receipts.
carbon copy. You know, back in the day, you put the little paper in between because you don't want the carbon copy to come through on all the receipts.
Oh my God. Like, it's crazy. Like, you know, people ask me all the time. He's like, well, what made you read the book?
Yeah.
I said, I'm nosy. I said, you know, when she, the thing is, people write these kind of books all the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's nothing special about these kind of books. What makes this book special is the video, well, the tapes.
Yeah.
The tapes, when you can produce proof of what you've written.
Yeah.
Honey, she was Inspector Gadget out
Right.
here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, we should
that's
hire
what
her to be
makes
an
it
investigative
different.
journalist here. Because, like,
I'm impressed because as you're reading the book and you're like highlighting dates, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like August 4th, and she really does have all of the receipts.
That's
like,
what I'm saying. That's why I'm
like,
talking about the carbon copy.
Yeah.
It's not just I said because I was there that day. It's like, let me flip to this page. Invoice number 772. Yeah, right here. Roll it. Roll the film. Like, oh, okay.
it's crazy, but I think, you know, I think that I did it just like I thought a couple of my friends was going to watch. It was going to be Kiki and then moving on with life.
Right.
And like now, like people had told me for years, they was like, you should do a podcast. But I'm like, for me, I'm like, what would I do a podcast about? Like entertainment and stuff. That's so saturated. Like everybody does that.
Yeah.
And then you would be he's another queen doing an entertainment podcast.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's not really special. And like I have really been following politics in the election cycle, like for the better part of the last 3 or 4 years. Because I love Don Lemon.
Okay.
You know.
He loves you back. He loves you back. I'm sure he's reading your receipts like, you better read those receipts, honey.
So it's just like maybe start really getting into it and really getting into the process low key. And when this book hit, you know, I was just like, oh, this is just too good. And like now it is what it is.
I think what's great about your voice, though, is reminiscent of what we do here at The Real News. It's important for people to understand what's going on around them, however they can get it. And what you bring is a relatable voice, like, you know, it's kiki and it's funny, it's cute, but you know what you're talking about. You've ingested it, and your ability to read the read also comes from exactly what you just said, right? Like, I've been interested in politics. I've been really making sense of it for myself, and so I'm going to use my voice in a way that other people can really connect to, and that's dope.
Yeah,
and that's like
it's important for people to get it plain language. You know what I mean? I remember Miss Gladney. I hated theater. I hated Shakespeare, and I was a theater major, so that was problematic.
That those don't go together.
Yeah. But my English teacher, Ruth Gladney, was a Baltimore girl, Dunbar graduate, and she could break Shakespeare down into like a way I can understand it. You know what I mean? I feel like sometimes people think politics is like this complicated, crazy thing because they make it seem like that, but you make it very digestible.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
it's realistic. Like people call my broadcast hood audible. So it's like
so beautiful.
That's I'm a proponent of that, of street level. However we can get people out to the polls.
Absolutely.
However we can get people
paying attention,
into holding people accountable.
Yeah.
Then like some people like I went to this interview 2 days ago, and they stopped the interview, and they're like, "You're like so well spoken and intelligent."
Oh Lord.
Oh no.
And
So
that's
coded.
only because they see the video. I say, yeah, that's me with friends, but I know how to conduct myself in a business setting.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
But also, you're making assumptions about my knowledge base
Right.
based on my willingness to conform to white heteronormative standards.
Let's
and
go.
You
Let's go,
should
Doc.
be ashamed of yourself, because
Right.
I will read you and I will be your legal counsel. Thank you very much. So good. I'm a believer in let them underestimate you.
Yeah.
So
Let's get into this clip right here. This is from part 3, or as you said, night 3. Part 3, Unhinged, the Omarosa story. This one is Donald Trump versus the OJs, the Black Church Crisis, and Get Out. And this particular clip is about Donald Trump's beef with the OJs.
Welcome. Same bat time, same bat channel. You already know what it's giving. Unhinged, Omarosa live read. And now, people have asked me, first off, y'all are killing it with sharing the video. Like, bitch, I'm gagging because I didn't expect this at all. Like, this is some shit, like I said, it's just shit that I like to do. I've had some people ask me, they're like, what made you read Omarosa book? Like, she's not for black people, all of this. That's besides the point. Okay? I'm reading this book because, I feel like if you can bring people together over someone who has been such a divisive figure amongst not only people who voters, but also black people, then you can bring them together on some shit. Imagine if we all agree on some shit. So, without further ado, night 3. So, we start off here, just to put it in context, in July 27th, once, the Republican National Convention is happening, all of this shit is going on. So, the OJs, bitch. The OJs sent a cease and desist letter to Congressman John Micah, a Republican from Florida, and copied Paul Manafort via their attorney. Paul Manafort was the campaign manager at this time before we got Skeletor, a.k.a. Kellyanne Conway. He was doing this shit. You know where he ended up at, what's going on with him now. But this is the campaign manager, okay? Demanding that the campaign stop using their 1972 hit Love Train, which they changed to Trump Train.
Yeah.
God bless.
I love it.
if I could get all my politics like that, I would.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I saw somebody was like, I'm not buying that book, but I'll listen to you read it all the time. And I felt the same way because I wouldn't have known about the OJ's thing. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have known. But it's also an example of how dangerous this man is. Donald Trump is. Like, really, like, you're going to use, here you are again, a rich white man digging into black culture, trying to rip it out, put your name on it for your benefit and and I'm so grateful for the artists like the OJs who've been able to come out of because the 60s, that was a crazy time for artists. So many artists got raped. So many artists did not figure out the business, did not learn how to make sure they stayed on top of their coins and their copyright and that their messages was being used in the right ways. And so it was like, there's so much in that clip. That's why it's like one of my favorite parts, because it's like, yeah, this is crazy.
I mean, the other piece of it is, you have this inside look into it and you are pulling it out, right?
Yeah.
It's like, so I'm going to flip it on you. You want to take from us, I'm going to take from you. So nobody else made this a New York Times bestseller. I got you. Here we go.
That's very true.
And scene.
Yeah.
So it's,
So I saw Omarosa actually commented and was like, I want to meet you.
Yeah.
Has she reached out any further?
We did talk via social media.
Oh.
Nice.
I haven't confirmed anything because there's some things in the works, but
Yeah.
okay. You heard it here first.
But it's exciting because I didn't know you never know how a person is going to take when you're reading their stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because I think the reason why people like the readings is because sometimes I'm totally in Omarosa's corner, and then sometimes I'm like,
see, this is where you got me.
100%.
This is where,
what are you thinking? You know, so
Your
it's
passport to Wakanda has been rescinded.
right. You know, like I have people every day because like it's crazy. Like we have regular viewers, and like I'll literally see them one day say she coming to the cookout, and then the next day I'll read another chat and they be like, oh, her invitation rescinded. So it really bounces, but. You never know what, but the thing is with Omarosa, my belief is she understands show business. She's a very smart woman.
Yeah.
I mean, masters from Howard, you know, worked in previous White Houses. She's a very smart woman. So she understands what is going on here.
Yeah.
She understands that it's a good look for her, in my opinion, to have a black man, a black gay man from a city that is blue collar, like Baltimore City, championing this book. It's not coming from L.A. or New York or another political pundit. It's coming
regular
from
people, everyday
regular,
folk.
everyday regular, everyday person. So to the public, like, they believe it more. We're in a time where if your news comes from a certain source, that's why the Real News Network is so important. People just don't believe it anymore. So it's like if the source comes from CNN, unfortunately, there's a section of the country that no matter how true it is, they're just not going to believe it.
Which makes sense. Like I get why people are so disillusioned and so like unwilling to believe what they hear on news so often. But like, really, she should be paying you to get that message.
I mean, even my time in the administration, the fact of the matter is, you even have voices who are elites in corporate media who look like you and I, and they have a narrative about Omarosa. And that's what you hear constantly in some of social media and on media, that, you know, your favorite black talking head feels this type of way or that type of way about her. However, you know, everyday people can appreciate a read and they do want insight into what's happening in this White House, because it is still our White House built by our people.
Absolutely.
And so we have some ownership over it. And, you know, whatever the case may be, I think she can get to the cookout, but she will not be granted access to Wakanda. It's fine.
Right. It's interesting because I'm making a trip to the National Black Caucus next month, and not to be like, oh, I have this podcast, and I really want to be a fly on the wall.
It's one of those spaces where you see a lot, and you say to yourself, okay, you know, all my skin folk ain't my kinfolk. Folk are out there trying to make a coin and make a name, and so be clear. Just because they're saying the right words doesn't mean that they're in your corner. And you have someone like Omarosa who says whatever the heck she wants. But she's in her corner. You at least know what you get with her.
Exactly.
Yep, it's true.
So, I mean, one of the things that intrigues me the most is this, the attention you've been getting for this from social media is important, because, you know, it's a place where we should be able to express whatever views we have, whatever thoughts we have, whatever opinions we have, whatever we're doing, we should be able to express that. And then, you know, you have your core people who can choose whether they, like you said in one of the joints, like, you know, you can read the book or not, watch it or not. Like, you know, this next piece we're going to get into is an interview that Mark Steiner did with Jesse Duquette. He's a political cartoonist who regularly criticizes Trump, and had one of his pieces banned from Instagram. So this is Instagram, the next social media platform to censor political content.
So let's talk about this one piece you have, this cartoon. And I'm gonna read this for our listeners, because let's pop his cartoon back up on the screen for a moment, just so we can talk about this and what was banned here. So you can see, folks, what it says, but let me really quickly. So the cartoon itself says, neo-Nazis emboldened under Trump as bigot rallies are planned to mark the one-year anniversary of Charlottesville. And you have Trump saying, which we have seen right here, all you shouldn't have. Actually, you probably should have. All that mainstreaming of your sad bigot basement lives, you're welcome. With this kind of clown hat on that's a Ku Klux Klan hat, and sitting in front of a birthday cake with a Nazi emblem as a candle. And so that's what, this was banned from Instagram, right?
Yeah, for a little less than a week or so, 3 days.
And tell me what happened after it was banned, when you discovered it, and what interaction you may have had or not had with Instagram.
I had no interaction with Instagram. Instagram is profoundly difficult to communicate with.
As all these platforms are. They're really hard to communicate with.
By design, right? I mean,
Right.
I think there's not a mistake there. But this also wasn't the first time this has happened. It's happened, I think, a total of maybe 4-ish times over the past year and a half.
To you?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And when this one got taken down, part of me wasn't surprised because, again, the birthday cake is in the shape of a swastika, and certainly there is that does, I think, qualify under our community guideline as offensive imagery. However, the reason that was given to me, this is also the first of the 4 times where this has happened, where they actually deigned to give me a reason. Most of the time they don't. It's just like, this is taken down. Have a nice day. But this one, they actually said it was because the post encouraged violence and or depicted violence. And so that particularly, I think, really bothered me. I think if it was one thing if they said, hey, use a swastika, we're taking it down, I still would have a problem with it because there's been just outright alt-right and white nationalist accounts that posted swastikas without a trace of irony that I have reported that have remained up. So I would have taken issue with that as well. But this, I think the reasoning given just didn't square with me well.
Yeah, that's crazy.
You always feel a little tug when you have to agree with something out of the White House, right?
Yeah.
And, like, you don't want to agree with fake news, but you do know corporate media is
Yes,
pushing forward a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to agree that these social media platforms are private entities making decisions about who is allowed to speak when you have situations like, oh boy, being pulled off of all of the platforms, and the egregious things he's done to people like the families of Sandy Hook. But then you have someone expressing a left-leaning view also experiencing censorship. And then you have the question of the Constitution and your First Amendment right, and the ways that people don't understand what that means, right? It's protection against the government infringing your speech. Private folk can shut you down or give you consequences for what you do and don't say on a regular basis. So this was a very interesting interview.
And it's interesting to see how much more attention, I guess, like the Alex Jones of the world getting pulled off of the internet have gotten versus like the Telesur page, which is like, mostly funded with government money from Venezuela, was just taken off Facebook like overnight. Somebody who actually we used to work with here, Abby Martin, her stuff was just taken off like overnight. And it's like, she's very critical of like American imperialism. She is openly anti-capitalist, and that is not getting as much play as like Alex Jones, this like openly racist conspiracy theorist, is getting taken off the air.
Right.
So it's interesting to hear from people like this to see the other side of that, like the part of the narrative you're not hearing.
You're better than me, Darna. I don't like to say the name of evil.
He who must not be named.
Oh boy is exactly is as much as if you were in House Slytherin, I will not elevate your name. I will not.
He whose name shall not be.
He who shall not be named.
There you go.
That's what I say about Beyonce all the time. But
She who shall not be named.
Don't say her name.
Listen.
Don't try her.
Listen.
You'll
have House Ravenclaw, Slytherin, Hufflepuff, and Gryffindor at your doorstep.
What
Say her
is
name.
Beyonce though?
I think she would be a Gryffindor.
Yeah, I think she's a
Gryffindor
Gryffindor.
for sure.
We're diverging.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Your thoughts on social media censoring?
Well, obviously, my show isn't for network TV, but I think that's what the internet and social media is for. It's for people to have unfiltered voices, however you may feel about their voice. It's their voice. And like people sometimes they ask me, it's like, well, why are you not? Because it's funny y'all brought up this situation. Because they ask me, well, why are you not upset with he who shall not be named being pulled from,
the different platforms.
And I said, well, he has a base. Is his base something that I agree with? Absolutely not. But you gotta, when you play with the freedom of speech card, that could go both ways.
Right.
As with this young man, it went that way too.
Mm-hmm.
So you can suppress things. I mean, Facebook suppress people posts all the time. They don't remove them.
Right.
You know, you can put a disclaimer on his page. You know, it's saying this content may be sensitive to certain viewers.
Right.
You know, the following views do not express those of YouTube or Facebook or whatever platform. That's how I would have went about it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have pulled it because at the end of the day, unless he's murdering somebody,
Right.
you know, if that's how he feel, then he should be allowed to feel that way. Is it the right way to be as a person or with any type of moral code? No. But the thing that also scares me about pulling somebody like that is because now that is going to produce even more anger, and that's going to cause people to want to have less conversations.
Yeah.
And then we turn into the Handmaid's Tale, where everybody's just saying what they think you want to hear, but you never know what's really going on. And I like knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
Or 1984, really Orwellian. And, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because the question becomes, at what point does the speech become hate speech?
Yeah.
Right? How far do we go with allowing and elevating something into the atmosphere that is cultivating hate or possible violence? Where are the lines between the president of the United States standing on the stage saying "rough them up" to the police when talking about Black bodies, versus a conspiracy theorist on the radio laying out a story to people who are very susceptible to it and moving them to a place where they take action on it? Right? The greatest threat of terrorism in the United States of America are white men.
Yeah.
Right? And so at what point do you say YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, you are facilitating hate, versus the cartoon that you drew was not nice, right? And it was
It's not the
vile.
same thing.
But
It's
meanwhile,
not the same.
but meanwhile, at least once a week, you can find a video on Instagram or Facebook of somebody getting murdered, actually getting shot.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can find all of these videos that, like, the human mind should not be, you know what I'm saying, involuntarily receiving, you know what I'm saying?
Over and over and over.
So it's crazy. And, like, you know, like Manny was saying, I think it's a slippery slope when you start banning people like Alec Ross, because I think a lot of times liberals think about freedom of speech just from their perspective.
Right,
You
right.
know what I mean?
Freedom for them to say what they want to say.
Let the gays be the gays and all, you know what I mean? And the freedom of speech comes from that perspective, but we forget that there's another side of that. And all they did was make Alec Ross more famous. You know what I mean?
And that's what what my whole concern is now it becomes a galvanizing.
Right, it elevates
Yeah, he's a
him.
martyr now.
It becomes a galvanizing thing. He's going to get booked more. It makes him more of a rock star to that demographic. Versus, and this is going to sound crazy, versus YouTube, which y'all really should have did, was suppress his posts, removed him from popping up in trending columns, and blocked them that way. Not remove it. So if you want to really find
the
him,
content, you can find it.
You can find it, but we're not gonna make it easy.
Right, you gotta look
but
for
then,
it.
like, but then, I mean, something that I think is really interesting is like the outrage about all of this makes it seem like people thought that like platforms like Facebook and YouTube were neutral when that was never really true to begin with.
Yeah,
so like,
that's true.
if they are suppressing someone like Alex Jones from being on the front page, a lot of it is going to be because like what he's saying is batshit crazy and racist, but like occasionally there's some little grain of truth in there. And other, like, if they're going to suppress him from being on the front page of YouTube, they're probably also going to suppress some shit that the Real News is doing from the like, because we've been openly critical of like the two-party system. We've been openly critical of, you know so much that's bad.
So true. It's all like, it's just like, oh.
It's
I
all
know,
crazy.
it's hard. Like,
It gets crazier though. Donna
We're in the Matrix.
Donna has been covering a lot of our climate change stuff, and I have to say, like about a year, was it earlier this year or the beginning of last year? Like Paul called us all in the
Paul
office.
J,
Paul
CEO
J,
of
our
The Real
CEO
News.
of the Real News. Shout out to him. He's out in LA right now. But Paul called us all in, and he was like, climate change is the priority. It's like, if we don't get on climate change, we don't start covering climate change, you know. And I was sitting there like, whatever. Like,
Right.
what? Like,
I do.
I honestly did not care. You know what I mean? But Darna's been doing this coverage that, again, makes it, I feel like these stories make it a lot more understandable for me. And now, like, I find myself like caring. I care a lot more than I used to. This one in particular, environmentalists demand feds stop a Hogan-backed pipeline, and this is a pipeline coming through Maryland, and done by the same people that were putting up the pipeline.
The Keystone XL.
The Keystone XL pipeline. So let's check this out.
And Maryland's Republican Governor Larry Hogan, who's up for re-election in November, as I mentioned before, signed a fracking ban last year in 2017. But he and his MDE, Maryland Department of the Environment, gave this pipeline the green light. And some are saying that it's hypocritical to ban fracking while allowing fracked gas to be shipped through the state. What's your response to that?
We completely agree that, back in 2017 that we banned fracking in the state, yet Governor Hogan is allowing it to travel under the Potomac River, which is a drinking water resource for millions of people. So we think that, Marylanders were clear that they didn't want fracking. So why should we allow fracked gas to come through the state and bring along all of the harms that can come along with that?
It's interesting that you're saying like it makes it easier for you to digest it, because for me, I feel like I'm also kind of learning as I go. So like sometimes I'm not doing these interviews being like, I want to get this person to say this. I'm just like, I am genuinely curious about like why this is important, what the risks are, like what are the horrible things that could happen to people. Because climate change sounds like such an abstraction, right? But like a pipeline literally making it hard for people to get like drinking water is like just
being in a place where, just like with the Keystone Pipeline, where they said it would not poison your drinking water, it will not poison your groundwater, and oops, okay, we know we said it wouldn't.
We made a mistake,
but we're gonna keep building it.
Yeah,
it's gas. So it's
Can
going
seep
to
into
do
anything.
that. It's like gas seeps out at least. Like it's
basic science.
It
can go where it wants.
Yeah. Mos Def got that song on his first album, New World Water, and that was like 1999.
Yep.
And I remember like smoking weed and really thinking like deep about it. Like, wow, like are they really gonna like get us through the water? And here we are, almost 20 years later, and sure enough, like we
whoever
got all of
controls
these
the natural
issues with water.
resources controls the world.
Yeah. And it's like, it doesn't even have to be intentionally like we're going to poison your water. It's like we can make a profit off of doing this thing. We don't care what happens to you. Like, and let alone
rules.
Exactly. And like right now, let alone right now, like you're going to be poisoning the drinking water. Who is going to be first affected when the climate starts changing? It's always poor people, always people of color. So
yeah, I mean, we see this week some other reporting that Darna's been covering, the flooding in Ellicott City. People said there was a once-in-a-lifetime flood in Ellicott City a couple years ago, and then the second once-in-a-lifetime flood happened
a year later,
right.
or 2 years later.
Right.
That's
and so
because
now
they overbuilt it.
Well, they're about to tear some of it down, Main Street. They're going to pull down 10 of the buildings to figure out how to stave off future flooding. And, how crazy is that? Buildings that have been here for decades.
yeah, some of them like 100 years.
Right. But then the developments that are brand new, for the sake of developers lining their pockets,
Staying there.
they stay and they continue on their plans. So
There's a plan. There's a whole plan.
That's wild. Speaking of the water, let's get into this. Over 2,000 cities, this blew my mind, over 2,000 cities with higher lead levels than Flint, Baltimore, Milwaukee, Chicago, and Cleveland all have been victim to high lead and other toxins in the water. Eddie Conway and Eugene Puryear discussed the frustrations of citizens and the struggles to get clean water in communities of color. Let's check this out.
Can you give us an overview of what's happening with the water systems in other cities as well as Flint?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's pretty stunning when you look at it. I many people forget, but shortly after the Flint crisis broke, USA Today actually did a study and found over 2,000 localities that had levels of lead in the water that were actually higher than Flint. That was in early 2017. They did that study. Reuters then subsequently later in that year did a similar study where they looked at about 3,000 census tracts. They actually looked at more than that, but they found about 3,000 census tracts around the country that also had higher lead levels in water, and also in terms of the lead blood level than what we were finding in people in Flint. And I think when we look at the places where it's the worst, we're finding it's either inner cities, quote unquote, in places like Milwaukee has a huge issue, Chicago, Baltimore, Cleveland, but also in a number of sort of rural areas and smaller towns. And I think the common denominator between all of those are places where there's either deliberate disinvestment or because there is just not as much going on there in terms of the economy, people with wealth, and so on and so forth. There has also been disinvestment in the infrastructures.
All right. So putting up a story next week, Monday or over the weekend, about the new school buildings opening up in Baltimore City. And one of the most significant things about these new buildings is the children being able to drink water.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's crazy.
I mean, for 10, 15 years, at least 10 years, the water has been shut down in all Baltimore City schools because of lead in the pipes.
Mm-hmm.
Our children cannot go to school and drink the water because of lead in the pipes, right? Yeah. And, you know, people are so up in arms about Flint, but this story tells you, again, you know, they may try to come for us through the water.
Yes.
Because at the point that you do know that there's lead in the water, then what? Then it is intentional. It's not about profit.
Yeah.
They already are coming for us. I mean, you can literally see the difference when you go to a affluent school. You know what I mean? Like, there's plenty of filtered water. There's plenty of spring water. If it's not already in the pipeline, you know what I mean? Every classroom has a cooler or something like that. You know what I mean? Where they can get water. And I think it's a terrible tragedy and sad that it's not urgent at all. Like Flint, like the fact that Flint is still dealing with this.
Yeah,
it's crazy, and the whole world knows.
I mean, you know, for folk watching, you know, we're not here to replicate Oh Boy when it comes to conspiracy theories, and you hear us saying things like they're coming for us, but I think people are rightfully so trying to live day to day and are disconnected from the ways people who seek profit and promote profit, right? When you hear one of the gubernatorial candidates saying things like, I've never raised taxes, I've lowered taxes, I will never raise taxes.
Which is just flatly untrue.
Which is A, not true, and B, feeds this concept of, you know, we have to protect business. We have to protect people's dollars because they're going to share that money with us, which is also a lie. It is a lie. It is a lie. It is a lie. If I don't have to spend the money to get you fresh drinking water or make sure that water is flowing into your community such that it's not contaminated, I'm not.
Yeah. And I mean,
end.
I think this piece in particular, at one point, Eugene points out the fact that, you know, Freddie Gray had
high lead levels.
High lead levels, you know what I mean? So it's like the effects that this has on so many different aspects of your life, you know what I mean? I was just telling a friend yesterday who's like, you know, having, you know, trouble physically or whatever, and I was like, how much water are you drinking? Like, it's important. You know, people forget how important it is to drink water. And so if that's the go-to for your thirst, which is natural, you know what I mean, and you're poisoning that, you know what I'm saying? It's like, what other aspects of their life, what other effects is that having on the people, the community, you know what I mean, how they respond to situations and all that. People were quick to categorize Freddie Gray as a criminal when they knew his record, but nobody brought up the fact that, you know what I mean, he had lead poisoning. That's not important to me.
Which is criminal of anybody who would allow, like, kids to grow up in a place where they're drinking lead water. And
well, here's the thing. What surfaced the issue in Flint were pediatricians.
Yes, exactly.
Seeing the high lead levels and knowing as medical doctors that this is about to be. So my issue with Flint is not only that the babies are being poisoned and everybody's being poisoned. 10, 15 years from now, those kids who the doctors were finding these beyond elevated, poisoning, right?
Mm-hmm.
You then start to see a replication of what we see in cities like Baltimore.
Yeah.
A bunch of kids being diagnosed with ADHD, a bunch of kids unable to regulate their behavior, a bunch of kids being pushed into criminal justice system. And what do we see here with mass incarceration? High percentages of people who, when they were in elementary school, had special education services.
Yeah.
Because it all stacks together. For the sake of people trying to make money.
Yeah.
Yep. We got a joke in Baltimore. We always joke and say he got that leg.
He got a leg.
He got that leg.
Right. He got that shot. And they do give him nice checks, but if you don't have the education or the wherewithal to invest that check properly, it's gone pretty soon.
Well, the problem is, you got lead. Your mama might have had lead. You get that coin, and you think, okay, I'm gonna live my best life right now, and not like, oh, okay, I'm gonna be alive for another 60 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So make sure we have a home that is purchased and paid for, and we own the land, and put some money aside for our kids.
Or at the very least, like let me step up my health. Like let me eat better. Let me figure out how to not pass lead on to my children.
Right. Now that I got a coin, let me make sure I have a regular doctor's visit and seeing a nutritionist or something.
That's not.
And that's all intentional too, right? You know what I mean?
I'm gonna appease.
You just give people money.
I'm gonna appease my poisoning you with a fat check. Here you go.
Yeah.
Go
They're
on.
talking about they've figured out a way, and somebody I know that does construction home improvement just told me this the other day. They've figured out a way to bring asbestos back.
Yeah.
Like
I heard this on the news.
Yeah, they're putting it back in. Like they've figured out a way where we can do it safely this time.
Yep.
And it's like, how many times have we seen?
Yeah, exactly.
How many times have we seen
Right.
this play out?
Right.
And
You know
that's
what I mean?
the thing about, like, I think that some people who are just like, I don't know, maybe not paying attention to these kinds of issues think that lead is like a thing in the past. Lead of the water is a thing of the past. But like, have you ever been in like a Baltimore school? Like, and it's still happening in new places. I was talking to some folks in Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago who were saying that, again, because of like, it was a side effect of privatizing the water there was that to cut the costs of filtering water, they started using a new chemical in the water in Pittsburgh. Now there's a lead crisis there that's rivaling that of Flint, and there's been no accountability for like the company who's brought this in. So like, it's still happening.
I'm gonna wait for the next Erin Brockovich to bring the lawsuit of all the kids that have cancer from the water that they knew was being poisoned. Yeah.
But people are too busy. I think part of the reason, like, we work so much now in society, especially in America, people are trying to make ends meet, that they just don't have time to pay attention. And I think that government and, the powers that be know that. That's why they keep you in this hamster wheel.
And that's why they attack the media and why it's so important for the Fourth Estate to actually exist. Because if you don't know,
Yeah.
And for people to hold the media accountable the same way that we were talking about holding like elected officials accountable. Like,
responsible journalism and journalism with integrity is like vital. Like it's like a life or death thing now.
And I feel like it's so crazy to me, like, because even from a music standpoint, I see now how journalism has changed. I remember when I was younger and I would read Vibe, you had people like Alan Light and Dream Hampton who did real stories, real work. And now it's like you can literally do a sound bite and story by such and such.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's not realistic to me, which is why I'm very cautious when I do my readings, because I understand that
there's an angle.
You want real stories. You want an unfiltered, unbiased thing. And that's why, even though I love the anchors on CNN, they make it for me. I am very cautious with how I view their stories, because whether you want to admit it or not, or you think so or not, you guys are on a team. Okay?
Yeah.
You're on a team, like y'all Gryffindor, Fox News is Slytherin, MSNBC is Hufflepuff. Right. Y'all are all on a team. And like these independent, like you guys, what you do is so important, because it's, though it may not be shiny, okay?
It's unbought and it's unbossed. Yeah.
You know, it is researched. We didn't have a president. Like, when in our history have we had presidential debates in airplane hangars with sets and lightings and their faces are flashing on the screen like the Hunger Games?
Right.
CNN, you played a part in that.
Right.
Yeah.
You did.
Right.
100%.
Right. Yeah.
Facts. Man, let's get into this final story we got. Prisoners across the U.S. strike to end modern-day slavery. This is a trip because I think a lot of people forget that this is a thing. You know, people go to jail and we forget about them.
Yeah.
You know, meanwhile they have these jobs that they have to do that they're not getting paid for,
It's extension of enslavement.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to lock you up, and then you belong to me, and you can work for me in the way you used to work in the fields for free.
Exactly. And we all know, you know, that's how the prison industrial complex was built in the first place. So let's get into this. Prisoners across the U.S. strike to end modern-day slavery.
So the first major strike that took place in this country among people inside, incarcerated, was in 2016, September of 2016. So tell me, from that movement to this point on, almost 2 years later, what the difference is and what's happening at this moment.
Well, basically, there is not too much of a difference because of the fact that none of the demands were ever met. The Free Alabama movement called to action. 20 different states joined in, 40 to 50 prisons across this country, men and women that's incarcerated. We, as the formerly incarcerated convicted people's movement, supported them, stood in solidarity with 40 to 50 different organizations across this country, and we have yet to see some of the results of them locking up children, of them with the Habitual Offender Act, of what's going on with our rights to votes all across the country, and different things that are going on. So that's why what we have declared now and what has been declared by the Free Alabama movement inside the Alabama prisons is the fact that they're asking that we redistribute the pain. And in redistributing the pain, they're doing peaceful strikes all across the country again to say, hey, you need to stop brutalizing those that are incarcerated, treat us more humanely, and you give us our rights. And so they're asking us and putting more pressure on those of us who are on the outside, who are directly impacted just as they are formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated, to come together and say, hey, we are clearly the ones that fit the category of no taxation, taxation without representation.
It's a little bit of a downer.
A little bit of a downer. I mean, you know, when you hear people who should be well educated using nonsensical phrases like black on black crime to justify kind of a law and order stance to how people are incarcerated, how people come home from incarceration, what their status is in the community. You leverage people's fears so that it's okay. Well, like if you weren't a criminal, if you didn't go to jail, why would you wouldn't have to be worried about working for pennies on the dollar.
Don't do the crime if you ain't got the time. Do up.
Way to bring the energy up.
I can't exist in the low down part. But seriously, like that's how a lot of people think. You know what I mean? Like,
and like no matter what a person did, if you see like the conditions of food that people are being told to eat in prison, it's just like, I don't know. You'd think like at the point when you are in prison organizing a strike, shit must have gotten like horrendous for you to be forgotten. Like people are on hunger strike all over the country in prisons. Like,
and that's
what it takes to pay attention. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I mean, they say this is probably the biggest prison strike ever.
Wow.
Happening right now. And when you have people who have been systematically oppressed and have been removed from society, able to organize across the country a uniform statement that they are free people. I am free. I am incarcerated, but I am still free, and I have human rights. we have to take notice, those of us on the outside of the walls, and decide what's okay for other humans.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think it's interesting too. Like nobody's talking about this. Like we
not
did,
in the way they ought to be.
Not in the way they ought to be. We did something, and I think the Guardian did something. But I mean,
this pop up a bit on social media.
Yeah, this should be one of the things we're talking about, because it is not just the modern day slavery part, but just the humanity of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
lack of humanity.
Or lack of humanity. You know, like I'm be honest. Like I've been locked up a few times, and just that whole setup it's just not humane. And the reality is the jail system doesn't rehabilitate people.
Yeah.
It actually creates an environment where they become worse.
Yeah, 100%.
You know what I mean? Like it's like
Shawshank Syndrome.
Yeah. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous. The times that I've been in there, just like watching guys who are used to it, and it's like that's not okay, man. You know what I mean? Like they're just like, this is the life, you know what I mean, that they live, and they've accepted it, and they're very familiar with how everything works. They know what to do. You know, I remember one time I went in and somebody stole my toiletries. It was like the first time I got locked up. I got locked up with my glasses on too. Don't get locked up with your glasses on, because you just with the glasses on.
Note to self.
But somebody took my toiletries, and I remember I went to the CO, and I was like, you know, I'm trying to take a shower, but somebody took my toiletry bag. And he looked at me and he said, take somebody else's.
Oh, God.
And at that point, I was just like, I'm not going back to jail ever again. This is crazy.
The subtext there is like, you're a bad person anyway. You don't mind.
Yeah, like, who cares? Like, he's just like, so what? Go take somebody else's. You don't know where you at? Like, and I'm just like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, oh, this is what it is.
That's how you
it's
think.
Like, you've created an environment where you're turning humans into animals.
Right.
Yes.
And like it's interesting that you were saying that there hasn't been that much coverage of this, because I feel like maybe part of the reason is because if you don't see people in prison as human, you also don't see them as having agency and like taking like this strike, I think, was coordinated to start on the same day that George Jackson was killed. But like there's such a rich history of people like, you know, going on strike and like activists within prison, which I think is kind of lost, because if you don't see people as human, you don't see them as, you know,
those people.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because like with the for-profit prison system that we have now, like you essentially want people to get locked up because you need the workforce. And then you're not really interested, like there's this issue now, you know, of course, with the California wildfires. I was reading about this, where they're putting the prisoners who volunteer in a program, it's like 2 weeks or something like that, to teach them how to fight the fires because they're so overwhelmed. But then they can't use that knowledge to go and be a firefighter when they get out of jail. So we're good enough to fight off one of the largest devastations and crises in California in prison. But once we get out of prison,
you will block me based on this record.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up too, because like I read some accounts of this where people were saying like, and like you were saying like if you volunteer to do this, but what is I think the whole volunteer process I've read also is like very coercive. Like they'll say, oh, if you want to do this, AKA if you want to eat tonight, like AKA if you want to like be treated as like a human being at all, like, oh, but it's voluntary. Like, what is voluntary when you're in prison? Like,
I mean, it's two ends, two sides of a different coin, right? If you do it and get the skills, I'm not going to facilitate you being able to use the skills to not end up back here.
Yeah.
But by the way, if you don't want to do it, I think you want to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Put your life on the line because I don't value you, right?
Yeah.
So.
You brought up a good point earlier, Khalil, like, you know, the psychology of like coming out and adjusting. You know what I mean? Like that's another aspect I think that just there's nothing there for them. You know what I mean? They come out and it's just like you just you know, and after you've been in jail for so long. Right. I was on the subway the other day and a guy asked me, how long has this been here?
The subway.
Yeah.
Oh
and I was like, what? He was like, how long they had this? He looking around. He said, I just got out, man.
Yeah. Wow.
I was like, I don't know, man, but I'm 37 and it's been here all.
as long as I remember.
My life. So you was in there for a minute.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
But just that little interaction with him and watching him almost like childlike, like looking around at this structure. You know what I mean? Like that was just like, wow, like what else is he gonna have to adjust
Navigate.
to and deal with and navigate? Yeah, yeah.
Wait till he see an iPhone.
Well, hopefully he will subscribe to your YouTube channel.
Exactly.
And the world will be all right. He will be up to speed.
Ooh, I hope so, cause
So we've been talking about some serious topics this morning, but there was a turn up this week.
Yeah.
Here at the Real News. Did you guys know?
Yeah. We had the whole Bushel live.
oh yeah, the
Yeah, we had
Weren't
the whole
you the
Bushel
first
live.
guest on the whole?
Yeah. Manny was him and Paul with Bond Street District were the first, the second guest that we interviewed. But we had Amachandra, who was on the first episode that we actually aired, and then Bond Street was the second. I think Bond Street was the second episode we aired.
Yeah.
So it's a reunion this week.
Yeah.
Amachandra performed on Wednesday.
Yeah, and then DDM is
we
in
got
here.
DDM in the house today.
Yeah. So I think we're gonna close out with a clip of the whole Bushel Live. It's an event we do at Ida B's Table where we bring crafts, live music together, and artist talks. But before we do that, I want to thank you, DDM, for coming and sitting with us this week, man. You have an album coming out, a soundtrack to a shopping mall.
Yeah,
Is it
but
already out?
it's not out yet. But the way things is going now,
We about to fast track that.
We got some situations I can't speak on, but it's a reason why my record isn't out now.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you will be hearing music from me very soon.
Okay.
This whole Secretary of Shade has definitely changed some things with people. People like you when you viral.
Yeah. That's a good thing, man. I'm proud of you. Y'all make sure y'all follow him, Secretary of Shade, on YouTube. We want to thank all of the people that make this happen behind the scenes. Dave Hepton, Stephen Frank on the sound. My man Will Arenas is back there working the visuals. Shout out to Jocelyn Dombrowski, who takes our photos every week. Who else am I missing?
The people of Baltimore.
The people
Yes,
of
thank you,
Baltimore
Baltimore.
and the world. Please continue
you.
to support The Real News, not just by watching, but donate. We do need money. We do not take corporate funding or do advertising. So this is all funded by the people. We cannot do this without you. So thank you for your support. And if you can, please donate. Yeah, I think we're good.
Let's go out on the whole bushel.
Let's go out the whole bushel. We'll see y'all next time.
But now we're gonna do, that song was Muddy Waters, now we're gonna do a song by Muddy Waters. Turn this into a juke joint real quick. I hope y'all got some liquor. Y'all need to pass out gin. Easy said he gonna get everybody in here a shot of gin for free. Say, the gypsy woman told my mother before I was born, you got a man-child coming. He's gonna be a son of a gun. He's gonna make pretty women jump and shout. And the world is gonna know he'll act it all about. Don't you know I'm him? Hey! Everybody knows who I am. Hey! Listen. Said I'm your hoochie coochie man. Everybody knows who I